All right, this is going to be easy. Thank you. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you.
Steve Forney, and you're now at Covenant.
Yes.
Usually when we're talking about RCM innovation or CFO innovation, it's over a good bottle of red wine and a cigar.
That would
If
be
my
correct.
if my memory serves,
That's correct.
Steve and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about the revenue cycle and analytics and all this crazy stuff we're going to talk about. So I'm excited about your new position and to always get the CFO perspective on this topic. So let's just dive in. So in the topic of innovation, RCM, or things hitting your desk, what are you fired up about? What are you excited about? What do you want to tackle? Let's just get, as we usually do, cigar and...
Well, let's start out with RCM. And it's, trying to be continually innovative is a challenge. We've done very well in the last few years on our revenue cycle, and have made a lot of improvements with class-leading, metrics. But there's still obvious opportunities within the rev cycle, and continually getting to those new opportunities means you have to do something different all the time and continue to improve on those processes. So when I think of challenges that I'm having with Anthem, they're the company everybody loves to hate nationwide right now. But how do I better resolve those challenges? How do I understand the issues? I know they are now not paying me as well. I know that I have a deficit in cash flow. How do I measure that appropriately so that I can have actionable information to take back to Anthem or to regulators or to advocacy outlets to get some traction on it? And it's not as simple as it would seem. And so having very strong analytics engines, analytics tools to be able to go in and look at those items is key to actually continuing to improve.
Well, with you, I don't have to worry about the shameless plug because I'm going to do it anyway. Like I said, you have to see Payer Action Center.
Yes.
We're getting such great reaction because that's what we're trying to do, is be in the middle as a neutral third party, collect all the data, let both perspectives see what's going on. You're providing the care, you're entitled to your contracted net revenue.
Yes.
Last time I checked. And so it's about, not just tackling high cost issues. It's like even the $234 lab accounts that you guys are like throwing rocks at each other all the time, and many times unintentionally. So it's just like, all right, let's put the heat map on this and let's put it in the right perspective so we can start to tackle it. I mean, you said the use case perfectly.
Yes. And to think about it, another interesting thing to think about in that process, which I think your tool would be particularly useful in doing, is in talking with insurance companies frequently especially when you're talking about modeling contracts.
Yeah.
Hey, this was supposed to be revenue neutral, for instance.
Right.
The insurance companies never want to look back at what did we actually pay you. They want to look back at, well, here's what we modeled. Let's put your claims back in the model. No, I don't care what your model said. I want to know what did you actually pay me and model that, not model it back into your model.
Right.
It's like you're working with two sets of unrelated information that can have two very different outcomes. Whereas having a way to pretty much just dump both sides' information into a place and we're actually going through this with a payer right now, and correctly analyze that for equality would be awesome.
Yeah. It's just, it's putting how many touches, there's so many accounts that both sides, providers and payers, touch too many times. Whether it's a portal inquiry, it's a phone call. So we got to stop the madness, and there's just always too much rhetoric, right? So it's like, okay, we have the data, and payers. I don't think payers realize as much as they should that hospitals now have. We're not the only one, right? I like what we do. Put a PET scanner on top of the receivables and light it up like a Christmas tree, so that folks like you and your staff can see where are the risks, where are the underpayments, where are the problems. So it's like both sides have the night vision goggles. Now it's time to just like start tackling problems and not having, so many touches on accounts, right? And that's how I'm trying to keep it simple.
No, and I think that's a really good way to look at it, because there's not enough time in the day and not enough people to
exactly.
Have this be a manual process in any way. But of course, the challenge is once you now take it away, manual processes, of course, have their own risks inherent in them. But other than the fact that they're time consuming and take forever and a lot of resources, usually your results can be at least audited and verified and such. The problem is, the challenge of that is, how do you take that and automate it and have that auditability still exist and not have the model that you're creating now out of this, or the automation you're creating out of this, kind of blow up and run amok?
Yeah. Here's something I'd love your perspective on. So many people want to do fancy, I'm just going to say it, fancy, innovative things. Mm-hmm. They want to be disruptive, transform.
Yep.
But you can't just go like install 4 bots and then say I'm an innovator.
Yep.
So if we're going to take 30% of cost out in 5 years, my last guest had a very practical answer. In my view, that's doable. Can you automate 30% of your revenue cycle in 5 years? I think you can. You probably would agree.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, but the rub is always like being afraid to invest. You have to invest in it. It's not going to just come. So, like, how do you? You're the CFO, right? So, how do you make that happen? Do you have to build consensus? Do you just say, nope, I'm Steve, I'm putting the money in the budget?
Well, there's certainly an aspect of building consensus and building what's the value proposition around it. And I think that in revenue cycle specifically, it's a lot easier to build those value cases than it would be, like we talked a little bit about service lines. Everybody says they want to know what service lines are and how much money do I make, etc. But then when you go back to them and say, well, okay, I need to invest in business intelligence tools that are going to cost $1 million a year, all of a sudden everybody goes like, why do you need those?
Yeah.
Well, at least with revenue cycle, if I go, hey, I need to invest in automation that's going to cost $1 million a year, but I expect to get this better throughput on my billing, I'm going to reduce my denials by this much, I'm going to speed up my patient access process by this much, here's my total ROI upside on this, it's 5x, and good? Now that's an easy discussion to have.
I mean, to your point, we've turned the word ROI into ROAA, because our job is to pay for ourselves. So it's return on analytics and automation.
Okay.
Right? So the KPIs that we insist on being, and so does the client, is like, okay, we have to have a demonstrable return on the investment, right? And everybody should be, return on data is now the way you have to think about it, right? If data is the new oil, and it is, it's not just a headline, but let me also ask you this, like, when you came in, right, and you had fresh eyes and everything, how do you figure out, because this is always the challenge people have too with innovation, like, how do you figure out where to start? What process do you go through?
See,
and I know you're very hands-on, you dig in deep. It may be as simple as that.
And a lot of it is that. I mean, I don't want to distill it down to, like there's some sort of formula to it, because every place does have, while there's certainly commonalities
cultural
across
dynamics.
Organizations, there's always something unique about a place when you go into it. And so, at least from my perspective, it's really a lot of observation and listening for, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and just kind of figuring out where things are moving and what piques my attention that doesn't seem to fit. It's like, wow, that number, those, salary numbers are really odd, or gee whiz, I'll bet you we're missing billing for that because everybody misses billing for that. Let's go look for it. And then I start peeling at those particular areas and expanding from there and figuring out where the holes are in our operations, in our data collection, that's causing us to miss this.
Yeah.
but it's very, to me, it's a very organic process.
Yep.
And it's not rote, but it does stem from really just, like I said, being observant and trying to piece together how everything works. When a patient shows up, how does the patient show up? All the way through to, I'm not seeing that, I've collected on the patient and it's done. How does that whole process ultimately work, and what gets pulled into it, and how does all of those different pieces interact as you're going through it, but not just rev cycle, but clinical, business, operations.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me, that another topic that we're talking about a lot is just change management. So if you say, hey, we're going to go automate a few things, it's going to scare some people.
Absolutely.
So we know that. We know how this works. Let's give them an opportunity. You have an opportunity to upskill. These things are going to happen. I always say, just like a Detroit auto plant, if you're doing 100 rivets a day on a car and now a robot can do 1,500, that's going to happen. So It's all about upskilling and creating knowledge workers, and change is the only constant now. So
yeah, because there are people who, there are simply roles, and I don't like talking about it in the sense of people not having jobs. There are roles that will cease to exist, and new roles that will be created.
That's always what happens.
And
more fun roles.
Yes.
If you do the knowledge worker thing properly.
Right, and helping to upskill your employees to manage into those new roles is better and more productive, because now, instead of those individuals, performing some relatively low value-added task, now they're performing a much higher value-added task, and your whole organization is doing better as a result.
I was recently in a dialogue where somebody said, well, you can't teach a biller or collector anomaly detection. They'd be like, oh yeah? Watch.
Yeah.
And you click a button and you have a heat map and a scattergram, and you say, you have a tickle system, but you're allowed at your own discernment to go get value. This will tell you. You can teach them how to do anomaly detection.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's like, I think that there's this notion that if it's a high school graduate or a semi-skilled worker, it's like, no, if they have eyes and ears, and if they're a hardworking person, you can teach them a lot of things.
Absolutely.
So,
just do you want to make the investment?
Yeah. And there's the people investment and the change management.
And change management.
As much as I love, look, I have a bias to sell the bits and the bytes and the bots, right? But I know that change management is, if done properly, is going to make adoption of any technology solution better.
Exactly.
All right, so we're going to run, because you and I can talk all day.
Yes.
We're going to run out of time. So let me ask you this: 5 years. I'll ask you two ways. 5 years. I want the broader perspective.
Okay.
If there's $250 billion plus of administrative waste per annum in the revenue cycle, in 5 years, how much can we dent that? And what do you think you can get done in Covenant in 5 years in the revenue cycle? How much of it can you automate?
See, I think from an overall perspective, I think the imperative is there that can definitely be moved 20 to 30% in 5 years across healthcare.
Big numbers.
Big numbers.
30% of $250 billion.
No, $75 billion. And that's huge. So, now, as far as, obviously, much smaller scale, Covenant, but when I look at, even the improvements that we've made, when I think in terms of what's still on the table and what we could get out of, not just efficiencies, because I'd like to think we're fairly efficient, but there's definitely ways to improve, especially on the front end of the process. Billing has had a high degree of automation for a long time, but front end processes and being able to automate those and streamline those, which now brings me more patience and reduces friction in the process. I have to feel like I can find another $20 million per year into my run rate over the next 5 years.
Yeah. It's there. The money just needs to move around and be value engineered differently,
Right.
is the way I think about it.
Agreed.
I mean, if there wasn't that much waste, it would be really tough to drive innovation with the
Sure.
downward pressure on healthcare.
But there's tremendous waste.
So it's like recycling, right? We have to take those dollars and, value engineer those dollars.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, hey, since we could talk all day, I'm going to beat them to the punch because they're like a couple of minutes away from home. You're coming to the party?
Yes.
We'll continue this over a cocktail.
All right.
Always good to see you, Steve.
All right. Good seeing you too.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.